Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, yesterday I was not really ready to podcast. Today I'm ready to have a spirited podcast. How about you?
Yeah, sorry we had to cancel Saturday's podcast, but yes, now it is time. Feeling pretty good, feeling pretty healthy, feeling pretty limber. I feel like I can totally podcast right now, and so that's what we are doing. Tom, in an unrelated note, Michigan is back practicing now, and in fact, they had a spirited practice on Sunday. And then this is according to a tweet from Kyle Rowland, but other Michigan folks on the beat have reported this as well. But Jim Harbaugh says Michigan had a spirited practice on Sunday, one day after they were supposed to play Ohio State, and they canceled the game on Tuesday. So however many days that is, 5 days after canceling a game against the Buckeyes, they were back on the practice field, which is great for them. Good to see you back out there. Hope everybody's doing well. However, and this is as I tweeted, Ohio State would have gladly moved the game from Saturday to Sunday if that's all Michigan needed was maybe an extra day to make sure everybody was clear and you can keep practicing throughout the week. I have no doubt Ohio State would have moved the game. Fox would have whatever needed to be done. They have the NFL, but you could have played the game at night or whatever. Whatever Michigan needed from Ohio State to play that game, Ohio State would have done. And the optics of practicing right away on Sunday, and maybe it's Jim Harbaugh just exaggerating by calling it a spirited practice, but when you do that, you lend credence to all of the people who are saying that Michigan ducked Ohio State. And we are not saying that. We have not said that. But when you're back at it on Sunday, like the day after, it doesn't look good, and it just lends itself to confirming a lot of the thoughts that people had out there that Michigan really, really, really didn't want to play this game.
Yeah, and I've been of the mindset that no, they're not actively ducking this. There's COVID. We don't know enough specifics about the numbers within their programs in terms of contact tracing, who's impacted. You can't really accuse them of ducking the game. And that's been my position very consistently throughout this whole thing. I didn't really love Kirk Herbstreit coming out and saying the thing he said last week. We've had folks on our staff who I think have different views of that. And that's, that's totally reasonable to have a different interpretation of the facts. That's fine. But, a lot of times when we use I'm not saying that this is the case, but if this was the case, this is a lot like what it would look like. A lot of times we use that as a proxy for, I know this thing, but I cannot tell you that I know this thing. That's not what I'm doing here. This is me literally listen to the words I'm saying. And these are the words. This is exactly how I mean them. I am not saying that Michigan ducked Ohio State. But if Michigan was avoiding Ohio State, it is a very, very specifically timed return to the field at the exact moment that it would not allow them to play again against Ohio State. That may have been a completely legitimate thing. I don't know. We can run through. I have the Michigan releases the testing numbers. I can run through the testing numbers for each week and let you know how many guys were impacted. But that doesn't include the contact tracing numbers. That doesn't include the which position groups these guys are in. Are they missing every offensive lineman, or would have been missing offensive linemen on Saturday, but they would get them back this week? Like we don't know that. But it does not look like Michigan made anything more than the barest minimum attempt to play this game. You look at how the lengths that Ohio State has gone to play games. It does not seem like that Michigan did anything more than kind of like, well, we tried. That's all we need. Look, we did enough to say we tried, and that was it.
Tom, have I explained or told you the story of the best nap I've ever had in my life here? And I may have. I think I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I was curled up in a recliner, just really great nap. And I had a soccer championship game that day. And I just, I couldn't. I was so comfortable taking that nap, and I realized like this at that point was the best nap of my life. And so I was like, I'm not going to do the soccer thing. I'm just going to stay here. And I don't regret that decision because, as I just said, it's still the best nap I've ever had in my life. But I could have put more effort into, getting out of the chair, riding my bike to the game or whatever match. Sorry. See, I'm not the biggest soccer person. Go Crew. But, I put in no effort. As you're saying, there didn't seem to be a bunch of effort that Michigan put in. I give Michigan the benefit of the doubt in that when they canceled on Tuesday, they did it seeing their numbers rising, which they were. I think they went from like 7 to 9 to 14 or 9 to 7 to 14 among the athletes in the department over the course of 3 weeks. And so, yes, they cancel on a Tuesday, I believe, if that's correct. And in doing so, allowing Ohio State and the Big Ten to try to find a new opponent rather than waiting until the 11th hour like Ohio State did, literally the 11th hour like Ohio State did when they had to cancel against Illinois. And so, yeah, it's nice that they canceled in advance to try to allow Ohio State to find an opponent. I wonder if they could have played if they hadn't canceled and worked towards playing, because I know I've said on this show and probably others, one of the reasons that Friday game was canceled, or that the Buckeyes canceled that Illinois game on a Friday, in my opinion, is because it was like 10 p.m. Friday. The game was set for a noon kick. That eventually got pushed to a 3:30 kick. And then like 10 minutes later, the game was canceled. But I think it was the fact that all of this was happening on a Friday night. If it had been Tuesday or a Wednesday, it gives you time to let's reassess the situation and see if we can figure this out. There just wasn't enough time Friday night at 10 p.m. when you're about to get on a plane in like an hour, later that hour, get on a plane and head for Illinois. And there was just too much going on. So they decided to shut things down. With Michigan here canceling on a Tuesday, there's, yes, you give Ohio State an opportunity, but I wonder if Ohio State would have rather, certainly after the fact, they would have rather waited and waited and waited, knowing that they couldn't find an opponent. And but yeah, then you're right back to practice on Sunday, and it's exactly what you would expect, as you said, if a team was ducking a game, but giving them the benefit of the doubt. Again, they do have a game Friday, so it's like you do have to get back to the practice field if you're clear and healthy enough to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the argument that Michigan was putting Ohio State in a position to potentially line up another game. Ohio State could have also lined up another game and just said, here's our plan B. As it turned out, they weren't able to line anything up. Michigan didn't have to cancel. Ohio State, this is one of these lessons the Big Ten has seemed slow to learn this year. Mm-hmm. It's okay to put in a plan B before you absolutely positively need it. Like, that's a thing you can do. Say, hey, we're going to play Michigan, but just in case Michigan can't play, we're going to see if we can talk Maryland to coming to Columbus or something like that. And that was not the avenue that they ended up going. And, this is again, it's not, no one is accusing Michigan of faking positive test results. No one is accusing Michigan of anything like that. The positive, and Michigan has actually shown a lot more transparency with their testing results than Ohio State has. So the weekend before Thanksgiving, the Friday before Thanksgiving, this is right before they played Penn State. These are athletic department wide numbers. They said 7 student athletes and 1 staff member had tested positive. That was before the Penn State game. They played the Penn State game. They lost the Penn State game. The weekend after that, this is before they canceled the Maryland game. 14 student athletes had tested positive, 1 staff member. So that's 15 total. I assume that's 15 additional and not 15 including the 7 from before. I don't know that for a fact. I don't know if they're continuing to test people after the fact or not. And again, this is also athletic department wide. This does not necessarily mean 14 football players. It could be 12 football players and 2 people from the soccer team or something like that. And then last week, Michigan released positive test results between December 5th and 11th, 13 total. So it's 9 student athletes and 4 staff. So, I mean, the total PCR percentage and the student athlete PCR percentage that were positive below 1%. I mean, that's just, you don't know exactly who was taken out by contact tracing potentially as a result of that. You don't know how many of those were football players. They could have all been football players. They could have just some been football players. Again, we don't know. And again, this is more transparency than Ohio State is showing in this. Ohio State isn't releasing any of this stuff. So Michigan deserves some credit for that. But, I mean, it does not look like they put in absolutely every effort they could to playing the game. And that's, it's not great because Jim Harbaugh comes out and says that, every single person in that team wanted to play the game, and Ward Manuels, comes out and has a very definitive statement. It's like, I don't think they were necessarily ducking the game, but I also don't think they were living up to quite the strenuous objections that they put forth publicly about just how badly they wanted to play the game either. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle there. And, that's, you can talk about program culture and all that kind of stuff. And, again, this is a year when we're all making decisions on stuff and there are not any real super easy answers, but, Ohio State's program, for better or for worse, has demonstrated one kind of commitment to football this year. And Michigan, I think, has demonstrated maybe a little bit of a lower level than that.
And again, it's important to point out that Michigan wasn't red. This was their call. This was not the Big Ten's call. And I think one of the big lessons we've learned this year is you can't give programs the option of canceling games because they will use it. And that's been the case, every cancellation in the Big Ten so far. And yes, pandemic, I get it, but it's if the Big Ten and Dr. Jim Borchers and the medical people have set a level and saying, hey, if you're above this, or if you're above this level, then we don't want you to play. But if you're below it, you're fine, ish, you're fine enough to play. And then they threw in the rule at the beginning, but consider maybe not playing, or consider if playing is as important or as is necessary. And so then when you start to get into that orange, you're like, well, you know what? Is it necessary? Well, Saturday is going to be an awful long day. There's nothing about giving up 70 points that is necessary. I mean, nothing about that experience that probably would have happened. Although, Tom, we don't even need to say probably anymore. We could just say would have, because we can't be proven wrong.
Here's the thing. You look at LSU, and I think I would have said the exact same thing about LSU this time last week. And LSU went to Gainesville with a team that had absolutely was checked out on the season, and they had players opting out, and they've got a bunch of coaches on it is a remarkably similar situation, other than the fact that LSU won a national championship last year. So they've got a little bit more pad. If anything, LSU is in a better position to kind of coast off of last year than Michigan is. But it's the same thing where it's like, oh boy, I don't know if these coordinators are going to be here next year, and oh boy, there's players opting out and guys entering the transfer portal, and boy, they look like they're ready to be done with the season. And then LSU shows up with 53 guys on the road at number 6 Florida and beats them. There are two different ways to approach that, and again, let me throw out the caveat. We don't know the exact situation with Michigan. It's possible Michigan would have had 42 guys. I have not seen an exact number on how many guys they would have been able to bring. If it's 42 guys, it's 42 guys, and that's probably not something you can do. I don't remember how many players Vanderbilt had for one game. Like Vanderbilt and Mississippi State, I think, are the two teams that have had numbers that were just that's not quite a full 2 deep, and you're playing a game. And again, we are all making our own choices this year, but you can do that, and that's fine, and that's an excusable thing, but you don't then get to talk about, oh man, everyone in that locker room was, oh, hold me back. I don't want to be like, I'm not sure I totally buy into that narrative either.
I don't know how you can when you then return right away on Sunday, other than, like I said, give them the benefit of every doubt, and you hope that is the case the entire way. If they had canceled the season, like if they had declined to play this game and said, we're not going to do a bowl game, then you're like, okay, things are pretty bad, but also things are bad there anyway. I mean, there's so many rumors flying around about what it's like inside those walls and how miserable it is, and the contentiousness, and is Jim Harbaugh going to resign? Is he not? Will he take less money? Won't he? Are there NFL teams coming after him? Some say yes, some say no. It's just a very interesting time to be watching this Michigan program. It just would have been better to watch them on the field rather than all of the stuff going on off the field. And then now they get to go play Iowa as some kind of reward. But just the fact that they're back so quickly, and I don't know what they did. I don't know if the facilities were closed during the week, or what if they shut them down and then Sunday was the first time they're back. But they had to know it wasn't going to look good, and clearly they don't care because, what's the punishment? There's no, the fallout is, well, we knew you were ducking, from the people will be saying that, but they would be saying that anyway. So I guess, you know what? Who cares what people think? Jim Harbaugh, I don't know that he ever has cared what people think, and he does what he does. And, he's probably like, I don't care what people say. I'm not going to see it. Let's just go practice on Sunday. And no, we didn't duck Ohio State. And people can think that if they want, and people will think that if they want. And I'm just wondering next year how much energy from Ohio State is going to be put into that game, knowing that they had it taken away from them this year. Are we talking Georgia Tech, Cumberland? Are we hang 200? What's it going to be? It's going to be full big house, we assume, on the road, we assume. Michigan, probably top 20 program, top 15 preseason, but Ohio State, I would assume there's going to be this feeling from the players. I don't know if the coaches are going to be saying this, but I bet today when they see this, like see that Michigan practiced yesterday, they're going to have that same feeling. Like, Michigan ducked us. You're not going to be so lucky next year.
I don't know how much more focused on that game the Ohio State program could be. In the what was supposed to be a hype video that got put out the night that the game got canceled, that then was just like, oh, this is just sad. It was all the players talking, a bunch of speeches from players, and it's, hey, in 320 days, hey, in 251 days, hey, in 131 days, and they're not counting down to the Penn State game. They're not counting down to the Oregon game next year. They're not counting. This is what they're counting down to. This is we have been all the way through that football facility. There are 2 countdown clocks for this game. There are no countdown clocks for anything else. So there's no question what they're focused on. I don't know how much more focused they could be. I don't know. I'm sure Michigan would rather take their chances at home against a quarterback who is not Justin Fields rather than on the road against a quarterback who is Justin Fields. And, maybe they work some transfer portal magic and discover a defensive tackle or two, or a cornerback who can actually play and make man coverage or two. There's a lot that can change between now and next November. So, maybe I think in order of likelihood of completely destroying Michigan, I think this year's team is probably higher on the list than the next year's team, just because of Justin Fields, just because of Chris Olave. You're going to have no Wyatt Davis next year. You're going to have probably. Who's to say if that decision's been made or not? Josh Myers, Thayer Munford. You're losing a bunch of guys off this team. Maybe some, maybe a Tommy Togiai. You're losing a bunch of guys. So, we'll see. We'll deal with 2021. We'll have plenty of time to break down the 2021 Ohio State Michigan game before it happens. But, you're losing a lot of guys. if there was going to be a year that Ohio State was going to beat Michigan so badly that they had to write a new alma mater on the train on the way home, like this was the year that was probably going to happen.
It will be interesting to see what Michigan looks like next year. It sounds like maybe a bunch of players may be leaving. At this point, I expect Jim Harbaugh to be back. Do you?
I would expect so, because and boy, we're gonna have a real smooth transition here. But early signing day is Wednesday this week. And if you're going to fire him after early signing day, or he's going to leave after early signing day, then all those guys who signed have the opportunity to get out of their letters of intent. So it sure seems like if you were going to let him go, you would let him go in advance of that and not have that option for people. But, I mean, I don't know that there is a rational decision to be made here. I don't know. I don't know that Michigan has the money to buy him out. I don't know that Michigan wants to buy him out. I don't know that Michigan, if they do buy him out, has a great plan B, like maybe Matt Campbell. Maybe they've had back channel conversations with Matt Campbell already, and he said yes. In which case, I don't know why they wouldn't have fired Harbaugh already. So I think just because there's been nothing done, I assume the answer is probably nothing will be done, because it seems like something would have happened by now. Because like the nobility of, we don't fire coaches in season, like, okay, that's wonderful, but then you're going to fire a coach right after players have signed their letters of intent. Like, that's not particularly noble either. Mm-hmm. So again, there is not a good, clean, easy solution, but the fact that there's not a good, clean, easy solution makes me think that, yeah, maybe he's going to come back, and it's just a matter of whether he'll accept, less money, smaller buyout, whatever, to have another couple of years thrown on his contract.
I do expect him to be back, and the coaching staff to be gutted. Mm-hmm. You've got to make some changes there. We keep talking about they need new energy at head coach. If you're going to keep the head coach, you got to bring new energy to the assistants, and mm-hmm. you've got to improve the recruiting. This means that Don Brown will likely be fired. He will then have more time for Brown Thunder, which is mm-hmm. good for us. Mm-hmm. We could revisit that. But they've got to do something different defensively and recruiting wise. And since we are on the topic now of recruiting, Tom, let's talk a little bit about Ohio State's class that will be signing on Wednesday. They have 21 commits right now, and all 21 are expected to sign on the early signing day, which is always, it's one of these sports holidays. If you follow the Buckeyes, if you're into recruiting. And now it happens twice a year, but the second one in February is like an aftershock, basically. It's a nice, you know what it's like, Tom? It's like after all of the Christmas shopping is done, it's like going back the next day to see what is left. And like, oh, somebody totally missed this. I like this. Or, reduced price. And you're like, oh, okay. That's how they do it in the SEC, at least. Or maybe the price increases. I'm not sure. But one of the things about Ohio State's class that is outstanding is the skill. When you've got 5-star quarterback Kyle McCord, a 5-star receiver Emeka Egbuka, and of course 5-star Travion Henderson, but you've also got 2 other receivers in terms of Jaden Ballard and Marvin Harrison. You got another running back, Evan Pryor. You got the tight end, Sam Hart. There's so much skill there that when you put it in the hands of Ryan Day, possibly Brian Hartline, possibly Kevin Wilson, and Tony Alford, there's almost no limit, but you can see the standard continuing on down the road. And with Egbuka, who just committed this past week, to me, like I said before, he's like Donovan Peoples-Jones. He's a little bit Chris Olave, except bigger. Just a supreme athlete that could be an outstanding corner, outstanding free safety, but a guy who ran a 4.42 at a combine last year, and Ohio State has been in on him early. Kind of the complete receiver, could play any of the 3 spots in Ohio State's offense, I think.
Yeah, and I think it was Mark Givler I had on the Morning Scoop last week to talk about Egbuka, and he comped him to Jackson Smith and Jigba, and it was like he said, I don't like to do comps, but, and then you look at the the highlights, and the shiftiness and the ability to make people miss in space and just the top line speed. And then you look at his commitment video where he's just like casually one-handing passes at all sorts of different weird angles. Like, it's like, oh yeah, that looks like something Jackson Smith and Jigba would do. And the editorial position on Jackson Smith and Jigba has been made fairly clear on this podcast over the last 12 months or so. So that should give you some idea what to expect from Emeka Egbuka. But I mean, what's remarkable to me is it's Ohio State adds a 5-star quarterback, 3 top 100 wide receivers, couple top 100 type, both were top 100 running backs. And it's just like, okay, well, yeah, it's an Ohio State recruiting class. Like this is a completely anomalous thing for virtually every program in the world. And right now for Ohio State, it's just like, yeah, I mean, that's the baseline expectation for every Ohio State recruiting class is like, oh yeah, they'll have a 5-star quarterback and they'll have, 3, maybe 4 really, really top flight wide receivers. Last year they missed on a couple of the running backs that they thought they were going to get, and boy, one of them's looking mighty fine at Texas right now. That's add him to this Ohio State team, and boy, I think that's that might change some expectations. But now they've added TreVeyon Henderson, who is, I mean, we can get into guys who might be immediate impact guys, but 5-star players in this class, which is right up near one of the best, basically the most in Ohio State history. They have a chance to add another one, maybe another 2. I don't remember exactly where Race John Davis is, if he's a high 4 or low 5-star, but I mean, the talent that they're accumulating is just remarkable. And you look at the positions of need, like what were the big positions of need this year? Like offensive line, they really needed to bring in some really high end talent. I'm not sure they got that in all of the places they wanted to get it, but they did, they brought in some nice players. But the defensive backfield was the one that, we came into this year like, man, they really have to reload that. And it's like, oh, they really, really, really reloaded the defensive backfield. Like it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's a big haul there. You mentioned TreVeyon Henderson, and for me, I remember seeing J.K. Dobbins highlights for the first time and being like, oh, that guy, he needs to be ranked higher. He is very, very legitimate, and unlike anybody else that Ohio State has had in a very long time, maybe ever, just the way he moves and his speed and his cutbacks. And you watch TreVeyon Henderson, and that dude he's right up there. I mean, he's dynamic. He makes guys miss. Ohio State doesn't have anybody like him right now. I think I wrote about him a little bit recently where, the Trey Sermon run he had against Michigan State where he made a dude miss and right up the middle and just shook a guy and then took off. That's like Henderson has that all day, and then the speed to get deep as well and to finish those kinds of runs. So I don't know. Yes, I agree with the immediate impact. I know some think he may be the most talented running back on the team next year in terms of running ability, and some think he will start. I don't expect a freshman to start when there are as many running backs on Ohio State's team next year as there are, and when one of them is Master Teague, who does everything the coaches ask him to do. And Henderson, can he pass block? Can he do all of the things necessary? Can he pick up blitzes? And that's a lot to ask of a freshman. Maurice Clarett was great at that, and that's one of the reasons he was able to start. Not to mention that the competition wasn't exactly all that great back in 2002 for him. But Henderson has everything you could want in terms of a dynamic playmaker, and I think he will make plays. You give him the 10 or 12 carries that Trey Sermon is getting this year, I think you're going to see something. I mean, that could be 1,000 yards next year over the course of 15 games.
Yeah, I mean, you go across 15 games, you only have to average like 60-something yards a game to get to 1,000. So that's, I don't know if Ohio State's going to play 15 games next year. Next year may be a little bit of a step back year, but
all right, Tom, you say that, but
if I mean, my position as the noted hater on staff is well established here.
Whereas I think Ohio State will be good next year.
You think Ohio State will play 16 games? They're going to get promoted to the AFC Tom, North.
The more games you play, the better you are. That is the rule.
That is facts only. That's why all those teams that went to Hawaii to play the bonus game back in the 90s, like that, they all won the national championship. That's how it works. Yes, sir. Yeah, I mean, this is just you just look around the field at this class, and it's like I think Ohio State fans are completely. Well, I know Ohio State fans are completely spoiled at this point, where it's like, well, yes, it is technically on pace to be the single greatest recruiting class in program history, but they might not catch Alabama for the recruiting national championship. Like, okay, like if you end up with a 320 as opposed to Alabama's 322 in total points or something, like it'll be fine. Like this will be plenty to continue to win the Big Ten every year and get you to the college football playoff. And once you get to the college football playoff, you have you have the horses to win. It's just a matter of whether you get that one bounce or that one play that you need to get over the hump. But you just go through the field and it's just like, oh, another 5-star defensive end. Yes. Okay. Top 5 player nationally. Oh, there might be another one coming in a couple months. Okay. Mm-hmm. And just go down the top of the 247 composite list. And Corey Foreman, who's a player from California. Okay. So they didn't get him. J.C. Latham, who was a tackle who they were in on for quite a while, who ended up going to Alabama. JT Tuamaloau, defensive end / 3-tech defensive tackle out of the state of Washington, which is notably not particularly close to Columbus and also not a real pipeline state for Ohio State. Ohio State is still considered the favorite to land him. That one, recruiting guys say, may go into February and perhaps beyond. Like that could stretch into April, perhaps. I mean, that may be a little bit of a Terrell Pryor recruitment where it just kind of drags on and on. But he may be trying to get some visits before he makes a decision. And then Jack Sawyer, who Ohio State is going to sign on Wednesday. And those are the top 4 players in the country. And they're going to get one for sure. They're considered the leader for another. And they were a pretty strong contender for a third. Like, yeah, I mean, that's about where you want to be.
And then number 9, Emeka Egbuka there,
Mm-hmm.
As a nice kicker. But yeah, the J.C. Latham thing still kind of hurts, I think, because they had him. It was a mere formality. I think we each wrote commitment pieces for J.C. Latham,
Mm-hmm.
write them up and put it and save it and be ready to publish it when the need arose. And of course, it never did. One of the interesting things that Ryan Day said on Sunday when talking about recruiting is that you want to land a leader in the class on offense and then a leader in the class on defense. Like initially, like your first couple of commits should be those leader types, and then they become Pied Pipers for everyone else. And usually that's going to be your quarterback is going to be one of those guys. And Kyle McCord out of Philly has done that in terms of, just bring. I mean, he's pretty instrumental in landing Emeka Egbuka, I believe. I think they're close, and you want you get your quarterback in, then it's very much a Pied Piper thing where guys want to come play with him. You already start building that natural leadership, and then it also shows up in games later on down the road. And this year, more than any other year, I think the leadership of the recruiting, be it a quarterback or whomever, because there are no visits, there are no coaches coming to see you. It's almost all player driven. And when you've got a guy like Kyle McCord or any of these guys leading this, I think it brings them closer. It starts to establish roles for guys. Like, yes, I'm a leader of this class. Guys look up to me, and that will continue on. And so with Kyle McCord, he's also a 5-star quarterback. And hey, that's great. Great arm. One of 3 true freshmen that will compete for the job next year, which is just a crazy thing to think or say. But his role in putting this class together, I believe he's also going to be he's going to be an early enrollee, so he'll be here next month and fighting.
Yeah, and I mean he is someone who I think a lot of people have kind of, it's like, well, okay, after CJ Stroud or Jack Miller wins the job next year, it's like, I don't know that that's necessarily a complete given. If he's in the spring, that helps a lot in terms of potentially having a real legitimate shot to win that job in the fall. And it's not like Stroud or Miller have gotten a ton of game reps. In a normal year, you'd have all sorts of time during bowl practice to get ready, to have additional practice reps. You'd have all sorts of reps, while you're up 900 points on Bowling Green or I don't know, Buffalo, whoever else they were supposed to play this year. I mean, that's something they've really missed out on this year. And that, I think there's a legitimate chance Kyle McCord makes a serious run at that starting job next year. And he has, I mean, if you watch him on film, and Mark Givler has scouted him in person, and I think that you have to come away pretty impressed with him and what he could bring to the program. And with guys who have been there for 1 year and it was a real disjointed year and you really didn't get to play a ton, like it's not necessarily, we always hear about that jump from the first year quarterback to the second year quarterback. I don't know that there's going to be as much of a jump to the second year as there would be in a normal year for Stroud and Miller. So that may really be open for McCord to take that job if he comes in ready to go.
Yeah, and those guys didn't have a spring, which would have helped as well. And now they have said that the freshmen have gotten more practice reps than ever before, just and not necessarily practice reps, but just throwing the ball because there's nothing else to do for long stretches this summer. But yeah, it's going to be totally different in terms of practice, and that will be interesting to watch. Evan Pryor, the other running back, to me, is a little reminiscent of Travis Etienne. So, not bad. Another explosive playmaker there. Marvin Harrison, not like his dad, more of like the prototypical X guy, 6'3", 6'4". And then Jaden Ballard, to me, he reminds me of Devin Smith, former Buckeye, same high school. But yeah, I'm with you, Tom. The offensive line, you lose J.C. Latham, that's not great. Donovan Jackson's a 5-star guard who, to me, even he's listed at 6'4", 308. He can play tackle, in my opinion, because I'm a very astute scout of these things. But he's got really good feet. He's mobile. He's athletic. And Ohio State has played 6'4", 6'5" people at tackle before. Jamarco Jones was listed, I think, at 6'5" at OSU, and now is a paltry 6'4" in the NFL. And he was just fine. And Ben Crispin is another guy. Often he could play tackle, could play guard. The interesting one has been the Zen Michalski, who out of Indiana, that was kind of one of the late guys. That is the project, but not really a project because he's really athletic and he looks like he's going to be the prototypical tackle, and maybe he's one of those. Not quite like the last Indiana offensive lineman they got in DeJuan Jones, but similar in that maybe he's the guy that surprises everybody and has an impact maybe earlier than people expect.
Well, DeJuan Jones was, when you talk about a project, DeJuan Jones was like a real project. He had really not played a ton of football. He was more of a basketball player in high school. And it was just, he kind of blew up because it was like, well, this guy has really good footwork on the basketball court that should translate to football. And he was kind of not much of anything until very late in the recruiting cycle. And all of a sudden, like Ohio State and Penn State, and I think a couple other schools jumped in on him. And all of a sudden it turned into this like really high stakes recruitment. And Ohio State they really needed another tackle in that class. And we have seen this year, boy, they didn't know it at the time with everything that was going to come, but they really needed him in that class. Because otherwise, I don't know who they have starting at left tackle at Michigan State, but I think they were very glad they had DeJuan Jones there. So, but DeJuan Jones was much more of a project than Michalski is. Michalski looks like he's, I think his awareness is probably much higher because he's played football a lot longer. Like there isn't as steep a learning curve probably. Now, the ceiling for DeJuan Jones, if DeJuan Jones really can, get in and stay in the right kind of shape and, continue to develop, DeJuan Jones could be something really, really, really special. And Michalski, I think, has the potential to be a pretty good impact player for Ohio State as well. But as with all offensive linemen, I think you have to look at it as these are guys who no one's going to come in and play the first year. That's not a reasonable expectation. If someone does, wow, that's a really pleasant surprise, that's not a reasonable expectation. You sign an offensive lineman, and anything you get from him in that first 12 months is just a pure bonus. And then, after another 12 months, okay, then you sort of see, okay, let's now that second spring, let's see where this person is and what they're starting to look like at that point.
He is the number 333 player overall, still a 4-star guy. And he's like the number 18. If we're talking about Ohio State's class, he's the 18th ranked commit in the class. You put him in Michigan's class, I think he's like 12th, to give you an idea of the difference of those two classes right now. Tom, before we switch to defense, let's talk about the Australian punter, Jesse Mirko, because when you have an Australian punter, that is both. That's an offensive weapon and a defensive weapon because he helps the offense out as much as the defense when he pins teams inside the 5, and then the Buckeye offense gets the ball back at the 50 after a punt from the opposition. So it is going to be good to finally have an Australian back there after 4 years of an American.
Just wasting time with this kid from the Cincinnati area. Just Cincinnati's not in Australia. And yes, he has been extremely outstanding both on and off the field. Yes, technically, yes. But
thank you.
He is not Australian. And when you have the chance to sign an Australian, there are very few rules in college football recruiting. But when you have a chance to sign an Australian punter, you do it. And he was, I think, unranked on most of the recruiting services when Ohio State signed him, and now is ranked as the number 5 punter, and the number 2 player from his state, which tells me there is someone from Australia viewed as a better punter because I don't know what else Australia is producing at this point.
Well, let me just click on this. Oh, Isaac Pearson from Pro Kick Australia going to Texas is the number 1 player in the state of Australia, if you will. Cincinnati getting a number 3 player out of Australia. Good for them.
Yeah. I like the fact that James Evans is the number 6 player from Australia who is listed as New Zealand, New Zealand, which those are actually 2 different. Fun fact: those are actually 2 different countries. But that's okay. That's okay. 247. It's all right. Your respect for Australian punters is noted and appreciated.
Yes, Tom. Defensively, the story here you mentioned JT Tuimoloau, and we'll have time to talk about him over the next 3 to 7 months, and maybe he visits for like the Ohio State spring game or something. But Jack Sawyer, the number 4 player overall in the composite, did not play this season because of COVID. Just chose to opt out basically when the high school season looked like it wasn't going to happen, or there was just a bunch of confusion. So he decided, you know what, I'm just going to focus on me and get ready for early enrollee to enroll early for the Buckeyes and just try to be a part of the season. And actually, when he originally opted out, there was going to be no 2020 Ohio State football season, and he was looking at maybe being able to play during the winter season. That, of course, was told that no, freshmen can't play, and then shortly after, well, we're not even going to do the January season, so don't even worry about it. But he's a guy I saw, I think, in Bill Green's latest chat, somebody asked for a comp, and he's like, Bosa. He's anytime and we did this with Chase Young, and I got mad at people. Don't compare him to a Bosa. He's not a Bosa. Don't put that on anybody. But then, of course, Chase Young was a Bosa, maybe even possibly better, and arguably the greatest defensive end in Ohio State history. So I guess now it's okay to compare Jack Sawyer to a Bosa. Whatever you do, though, Tom, do not call him a Young.
I will never compare him to Orlando Pace. That is my solemn promise to you. Well, and this is just another one of these guys who, Larry Johnson, he has an assembly line somewhere where it's just like, oh, here's a 5-star defensive end. We're just going to add one of those every single year. Like, again, this is not a normal thing. Normal college football programs do not just keep adding 5-star defensive ends. And you go through and it's just like Bosa, Chase Young, Zach Harrison, Jack Sawyer. There's another one in 2023, I believe. Yeah, Brennan Vernon, who's up in Mentor, who I think is someone that Ohio State fans are going to want to keep an eye on. He's obviously not committed yet. He just is a 2023, so he's got a couple more years, but just someone to keep an eye on. And it just keeps going. And there are these constant rumors like, oh, when is Larry Johnson going to retire? And you keep thinking, well, he's going to want to see out Zach Harrison's career. Like, oh, well, he's going to want to see out Jack Sawyer's career. Like, oh, well, if Brennan Vernon comes, he's going to want to see out Brennan Vernon. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, and now you're in like 2026, 2027. So yeah, there are certain people, certain position groups. I think you can sometimes question something about how Ohio State's recruiting or the results of the recruiting. Larry Johnson, the defensive line, like, nope. He just kind of always has the benefit of the doubt. He has a great eye for talent, has a great ability to develop that talent, has a great ability to bring that talent in. Like, it's just, Do not question Larry Johnson, or you will end up looking stupid.
I do wonder how much he will play next year. I'm expecting a 2017 with Chase Young, and I know I'm not comparing Jack Sawyer to Chase Young. I'm comparing the playing time where if you'll remember, that was when Chase Young and Jonathan Cooper would play behind Nick Bosa, Sam Hubbard, Jalen Holmes, Tyquan Lewis. And yet, because they were blowing everybody out early on in 2017, Chase Young was playing as many snaps as those guys. And we'll see, like, because this isn't that next year's defensive end group isn't as good as that one, because I don't know that Ohio State will ever have another group as good as that one. But there are going to be a rotation that he is going to have to fight his way into. It's not just going to be, granted, not that that happens with any freshman, but when you're looking at instant impact guys, while he is the highest ranked guy for now, I wonder how much of an impact he will have. Could he have a Chase Young, Nick Bosa impact? I think so, where you're talking 4.5, 5 sacks, 6.5, 7 tackles for loss. I don't think that's too much to expect from Jack Sawyer if he's so good.
Well, I'm looking this up right now. I think Chase Young had like 3.5 sacks, because I'm pretty sure Zach Harrison had basically Chase Young's freshman year.
Right.
Yeah. Chase Young had 3.5 sacks as a freshman, 5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. And that's basically exactly what Zach Harrison did last year as a true freshman. And so that's a reasonable expectation. That's like the running back who comes in and runs for 250 yards as a true freshman or 300 yards as a true freshman. And it's like, well, those numbers aren't like super impressive. It's like, no. Look at the guys in the past who have done that. And, and then what happened? And then what happened to the running back who runs for 250, 300 yards as a true freshman and then he becomes Ezekiel Elliott. And then he, and J.K. Dobbins is kind of the exception there, because he got thrown into that starting role because of Mike Weber's injury in 2017. So his numbers were even more off the charts than that. But generally, you're coming in, there's enough depth in front of you that you're not going to get thrown right onto the field immediately. This is not like Michigan, where if you recruit a 5-star defensive end, like, he's immediately the third best player in that room. Like, that's not, there's too much depth at Ohio State to have that be the case. But if Jack Sawyer comes in and has 2.5, 3 sacks next year, that would be a pretty good indication that much bigger things are on the way. And that's a spot where you can get on the field relatively early, because there's not quite as much, offensive line. It's much harder to get on the field as an offensive lineman than as a defensive lineman, especially if you're kind of a pass rusher. Pass rusher, you can kind of not necessarily completely know what you're doing and be out there and be doing just fine if they're using you in the right situations. So yeah, I think he's going to have an opportunity to play next fall, and he's going to be someone that I think. I don't think I'm alone in thinking like, oh, that'll be really interesting to see what Jack Sawyer does next year.
It is interesting that there is just this baseline of Nick Bosa, Chase Young, Zach Harrison as freshmen, and it gives you an idea of what to expect. And because you can't expect a Joey Bosa, because that dude ended up starting almost right away. Like after 3 games, he's in the starting lineup. And so you have to look at it as the guys who don't start, what kind of numbers do they put up? And I would expect him to be right in there. For me, aside from the secondary, the most important grouping for me was defensive tackle in this class, because we have talked about how there could be issues with depth next year in Ohio State's defensive line if they can't keep Tommy Togiai, and just keeping him makes everything better. And right now there are only 2 guys committed, in Mike Hall and Tyleik Williams. However, I fully expect JT Tuimoloau to eventually be a 3-tech, even though he's probably going to fight like heck to be a defensive end. But it seems pretty clear that he's going to grow into that role. So you bring in 3 defensive tackles, and Williams listed at 330 pounds. So there's your nose tackle. That's pretty clear. Mike Hall is a guy who's listed at 290, but I've been told like he's a really, really good athlete. He posts videos of himself out there dunking, and so he does have the athleticism, could probably play either spot, which Larry Johnson loves. but also then you bring in, if we're going to talk about Tua Maloa already being maybe part of this class, then that gives Mike Hall the freedom to go wherever he grows into. And maybe now you've got, if you can land two nose tackles, like two elite nose tackles in one class, then that's pretty good. And if those two guys are that gives you some comfort down the road. So I think just those two guys and then whatever else comes after it was key, and just building up the bulk of the interior of the line, because one or two of those guys are going to have to play next year, I think.
Right. I mean, you're looking at losing potentially Tommy Togi. I think based on the kind of year he's had, I would be fairly surprised if he comes back. So probably Tommy Togiai. You're losing Antoine Jackson on the inside of that defensive line. Jerron Vincent should be back, but there's not tremendous depth. I think Jerron Cage, this is his
fourth year.
So
here's a question. I'll interrupt you real quick, Tom. Did you watch the senior day videos?
I did. Yes.
There was no Haskell Garrett.
There was no Haskell Garrett, and that's interesting to me. Now, this is his fourth year as well, so potentially Haskell Garrett comes back. I mean,
that would be huge.
If Haskell Garrett comes back, that's enormous. Haskell Garrett has been maybe the single biggest pleasant surprise on this year's Ohio State team. Setting aside the story of what happened to him this summer, just in terms of what my expectations for someone were in the spring versus what they have been on the field. Like, I think if you go back and listen to us talk about Tommy Togiai 2 years ago, we're talking about Tommy Togiai as a just you wait kind of guy. Haskell Garrett was, Haskell Garrett came in and he was the guy who played high school football with Tate Martell. And it's like, oh yeah, he's, we'll see what he turns into. And was not really a particularly impactful player the first couple of years of his career. And just, he was kind of like in the mix for playing time and like, yeah, he's fine. And he should be a good depth piece. And he's turned into like a really, really impact player for them on the inside of that defensive line. If they get him back, I don't know. We could go through and do a show of if Ryan Day gets to pick 3 people who come back next year and Justin Fields is not on the list. Like, I think Haskell Garrett would be towards the top of that list. Tommy Togiai would probably be pretty high on that list as well. But those are, if they just get one of those guys back, that's enormous for next year.
I hadn't even considered, because as we're just talking about this, I realized that there was no Haskell Garrett video, and I assume there still hasn't been. And Brian Day had said there was a couple of guys who declined to go through senior day, and we know Marcus Williamson told us before the season that he's going to be back. I think it would be pretty good decision for Garrett to come back and increase his draft stock. I mean, you're going to play 5, 6, 7 games, maybe throw another 13, 14, 15 or whatever on top of that. And now you're talking maybe you go from a 4th or 5th rounder to a 1st rounder. And then if you have him and Tommy Togiai back, they're just going to make each other better. And boy, I hadn't even considered that. I thought maybe get Tommy Togiai back. Hadn't even considered the thought that Haskell Garrett would come back. Now I hope we haven't gotten everybody's hopes up, and then they'll both be gone. And now you're down to, no disrespect, but like, Ty Hamilton and Jerron Cage starting.
Yeah, and these are, again, positions where it typically takes a while for these guys to develop. And Ty Hamilton's older brother turned into a pretty darn good football player, Devon Hamilton. But it took a little while. That was his last year at Ohio State. It was just like all of a sudden he just exploded. But that doesn't happen. Like, that's not a place where you're going to typically play a true freshman. That's just, there's just a strength you have to build up that it's hard to do at a high school level. Like, that's just, you're just not quite ready to play as a true freshman. So, these guys are going to take a little time to grow, and Coach Mick will have to put in a whole bunch of hours with them and all of that. But there is depth there. This is not, every time we do the Michigan Ohio State comp, this is the position where we talk about Michigan and it's just like, oh man, there's nothing there. This is going to be a disaster. There's stuff there for Ohio State behind the starters, but if you don't have to throw a 1st or 2nd year player onto the field, that's a good thing. You want those guys to be depth guys. And then 3rd and 4th year, you take more of a starting role. I mean, that's Tommy Togiai has been a far different player this year than he was last year. Part of that was just opportunity, but part of it is just like he's making the most of his opportunities this year because it's his third year. It takes a while. Same thing with Haskell Garrett. Like it takes a while to get the technique refined, get the strength, where it needs to be, all of that. So if they can get some of those guys back and you don't have to lean on that youth quite so early, like that would be a huge deal for this team.
Yeah, I agree. And it gives us something to think about moving forward. The other big area, the area of need that you had mentioned was the secondary. And they've got 6 commits from defensive backs, although Jalen Johnson out of Cincinnati LaSalle probably grows into a linebacker. I know Mark has mentioned the words Darren Lee when talking about Jalen Johnson. So I know I've heard he doesn't like to throw comps out there, but also Darren Lee.
For a person who doesn't like to throw comps out there, Mark.
Willy-nilly out here. Everybody, you get a comp, you get a comp. So, maybe a future bullet there, but it seems like they've gotten some bases covered because you've got J.K. Johnson. Ja'Kalen Johnson is one of the top corners in the nation, the number 3 corner. And then they stole Jordan Hancock. He was committed to Clemson, I believe.
Correct.
The number 4 corner. And then they get to their projects, Tom, where you got Andre Turrentine, the number 9 safety, barely a top 200 player. I mean, come on. Denzel Burke out of Arizona, who I believe had shoulder surgery in the fall and missed most of the season. The number 8 athlete could end up corner, could end up safety. I think corner at this point. One of my favorite guys in the class, and if that's a topic we can get into after this, that's fine. Jansen Dunn, the safety out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. When you watch him, Tom, I don't like to throw comps out there, but for me, he looks like Malik Hooker. So just you've got almost an entire Ohio State secondary out there. You got 2 outside corners and say an inside corner with Denzel Burke, and then you've got 2 safeties and Turrentine and Jansen Dunn. So it's almost like they're building a little mini roster with those 5. And man, when you look at the issues the secondary has had this year, just in terms of numbers and not being able to turn to guys, you throw these 5 guys on with Ryan Watts and Legend Cavazos and Cameron Martinez and Lathan Ransom and Court Williams if he stays at safety. Again, those are all going to be technically true freshmen again. So you're looking at like 10 true freshmen or so in the secondary next year, which is a lot, but at least half of them, 4 of them, 3 of them have gotten some experience this year. But there's going to be more talent next year, but man, it's going to be inexperienced.
Yeah, and this is a difficult thing for Ohio State is you've got Cam Brown back, you've got Seven Banks probably back. I don't think Seven Banks is probably ready to leave for the NFL. I don't think Josh Proctor has had a platform year for the NFL, so those guys are all probably back. But you're still losing Sean Wade. That's never easy. But you do now have a bunch of options behind that first line because that's where they've run into issues this year. Is Cam Brown got hurt. And then it was just like, there's not any super fantastic answers behind these guys. And we've gone into all the reasons why. We should mention Marcus Williamson in there as well. Marcus Williamson, I think, probably has a pretty decent chance to come back. I don't think he was one of the senior videos, was he?
Right. No, yeah. While you were on your phone and I was doing this show by myself, like 8 minutes ago, I mentioned Marcus Williamson telling us back in the summer that he was coming back. So
yes. So that was that's another piece they get back. But then you have some of us have lives going on also during this. Jerk. Children who need to get to events. Doesn't matter. That's fine. We're not talking about children. We're talking about the Ohio State defensive backfield. You have these guys who are a good, solid second line there. You're building up that depth now. And, they're not all going to hit. That's just not how these classes work. You take in a class and it's like, oh, these 3 guys are fantastic. And one guy was okay. And then this guy didn't pan out for whatever reason. So, the odds that 3 years from now, that is the starting 5 defensive backfield, probably not, but you have so many good options there and there's so much good talent. This is not Michigan where it's like, this guy was ranked as the 600th best player in the country, and he might be a starting corner this year. Like, you don't want to be in that spot. And they are a little closer to that spot than they might like to be this year, but they will definitely not be there in a couple of years. Denzel Burke, you mentioned him out of Arizona. He was one of those people that people had been talking about as like, is this guy's commitment really going to stick? Is his commitment really going to stick? Because he has never visited Ohio State. And that is, I mean, that is a real leap of faith to commit to a program and travel from Arizona to Ohio and never have actually seen the school in person. But he tweeted out earlier this week that he is committing early, and he's committing, he's signing early, and he's showing up and early. He will be here in January. So that's a big win for Ohio State. And this has the chance to go from where Ohio State was offensive line wise a couple of years ago, where it was like, yeah, they have like 12 scholarship offensive linemen right now. And then they brought in some classes, they brought in some transfers, got that coverage stocked back up again. And then you're in a spot where if you lose 3 starting offensive linemen on the road at Michigan State, it's like, oh, that's fine. They've got guys. It'll be fine. They'll be, they have plenty of talented guys they can throw in there. And, there are two 5-star tackles out and a 3-year starter tackle out. And like, yeah, it's fine. They'll just throw in the borderline top 100 guy. And then the guy who was this crazy athletic prospect a couple of years ago, like, they'll be fine. That's where they have the opportunity to get in a couple of years with the defensive backfield.
Yeah, and again, I know Mark does not like to throw around comps. I believe his comp for Jalen Johnson, the 4-star corner out of St. Louis, was Sean Wade. Again,
is that good? I don't know.
Pretty good. And for me, like, I'm looking at Tom defensively. You look at these guys, like, which one of these guys would you expect to make the biggest or most consistent impact next year? Because you're looking, and as I said, Jack Sawyer, he's got a lot of guys ahead of him. Like, Ohio State rotates 5 guys this year; they'll only lose 1. So he's going to have those 4. You throw in Noah Potter, you throw in Darian Henry, you throw in Jacoby Cowan. Those are 8 guys that will have more experience than him next year that he's going to have to work through. And Jalen Johnson, J.K. Johnson, the corner, you expect Sevyn Banks and Cameron Brown to be the 2 starters. Does one of Ryan Watts, Legend Cavazos, are they the rest of the 2 deep? Does Legend Cavazos move to the slot? Where's Marcus Williamson in there? Can one of these corners make it into the 2 deep? Can they make it into a rotation? If they're rotating 3, can Jalen Johnson be the 4? Or can Jordan Hancock be the 4?
Yeah, I mean, they could, and again, this is if we're looking at who's going to be the impact player next fall or get the most run next fall, I think my answer is Jack Sawyer, just based on that's a position where it's typically easier to get on the field somewhat early. Corner is a difficult spot to do that. I mean, my example for this is always Jeff Okudah. Jeff Okudah came in as a 5-star corner. He came in early in the spring. And even with all of that, he didn't really become he didn't start until the Cotton Bowl. And that was only because Denzel Ward opted out. So, and even then it was like, yeah, it was okay, but it wasn't fantastic. Starting a true freshman defensive back is never a good thing for your team. That's just, you're not, they're generally
unless they are the
ready.
Freak of all freaks.
Right. But I mean, like, if you are the type of player who is going to be a starter as a true freshman in the defensive backfield, you're the type of player that is irresponsible to compare incoming freshmen to. That's like you don't want to start a true freshman offensive tackle. Well, what about Orlando Pace? Well, let me just stop you right there, friend. We don't compare players to Orlando Pace unless they're Paris Johnson, in which case we maybe did that sometime last spring. Doesn't matter.
Or Jefferson Kelly.
I'm not here to talk about the past. Pretty sure we didn't have a podcast when Jefferson Kelly was getting recruited. Just a guess. I think that I always look at position more than anything else in terms of who is going to be a freshman who could get on the field and be an impact guy. So just based on that, I'm going to say Jack Sawyer. But if they get a couple of those corners in that rotation, and it's even where you get J.K. Johnson and Jordan Hancock to the point where they trust them to be out there in the fourth quarter against, some lousy team they're beating by 50 points in the middle of October. They don't play Michigan in October, Tony. If they get these guys to the point where they trust them to be out there and not have it just be a complete gong show in the middle of the season, that's enormous. Now, I don't know, there's a long way between the moment they step on campus in January and that point in October. But if they get one or two of those guys there, that's huge, not only for their depth next fall, but for what it means for the future of the program beyond 2021.
Yeah, I'm with you on Jack Sawyer being the most likely to make some sort of an impact, just because, again, the rotation that Larry Johnson does just lends itself to having a freshman step in there more. Offensively, is the answer Travion Henderson in terms of biggest impact for a true freshman? Most impact, biggest impact. I know there's a lot of guys in that running back room, but he is different than everybody, and he is the best running back recruit commit for Ohio State since J.K. Dobbins. But even some would say he's better, and I haven't seen that in a video. But the receivers are going to be deep, so it's hard to say like Emeka Egbuka would be in there because he's got is he a Z? Maybe, but if he's a Z, he's got Julian Fleming ahead of him. Is Jamison Williams an X or a Z next year? Is Jackson Smith and Jigba a Z next year so that he can be on the field with Garrett Wilson at the same time? And we've seen what the true freshman receivers have done this year, and I don't think you could consider any of them having the most impact of the offensive freshmen, or maybe Jackson Smith and Jigba. But that's for me. It's Henderson. Where are you on that? Or you know what, Tom? I'm going to stop you right there. The true freshman with the biggest impact will be whichever quarterback starts. Thank you.
That's true. If we're counting true freshmen who are
2020 guys,
true-ish freshmen, yes. Yeah, the whoever starts is the answer to that question. Good job, Tony. Great job.
Thank you.
As far as the guy who's the most likely to actually start, Jesse Mirko, I think is the answer there. But if we're not playing lawyer ball, then yes, I'm going to say Travion Henderson, because again, running back is a spot where if you're in early, you work, you can pick up you get the blitz pickup stuff squared away. You have an opportunity to get on the field. I don't think he starts necessarily from game one next year, because you're going to have Master Teague back next year. You're going to have Marcus Crowley back next year. You're going to have Steele Chambers, if he stays at running back next year. You got Mayan Williams back next year. But Travion Henderson he just seems like one of those guys that, you just got to get him on the field. Like Bijan Robinson the year before, he's a freshman at Texas now, who was looking for all the world like he was going to Ohio State, and then had some family members decide that they didn't want him going that far away from home. So now he's at Texas, and he was like an immediate impact player at Texas. And Travion Henderson, I think, has the opportunity to do that. Now, Bijan Robinson did not immediately first game of the season like J.K. Dobbins did. But if you're getting on the field and you're putting up a 100-yard game, and it's not in the second half of a Rutgers game or something like that really means something. And Travion Henderson, I think, has the opportunity to do that at some point next year. So yeah, I think he's the answer there. Just the wide receivers, it's going to be real hard to get on the field as a true freshman at Ohio State at the wide receiver spot. There's so much talent there.
Yeah, and they have to be able to do a bunch of different things to get that work, and so that will be fun to watch. Just how things develop. Tom, anything else we didn't even talk about really? Reed Carrico out of Ironton, who is outstanding inside linebacker. One of the guys that I guess when you watch, if you Tom, we went to several high school games this year to watch guys, and sometimes they didn't do anything because either the game never came to them, like with Sonny Styles when we watched him. I went to see Gabe Powers, who is a 2022 5-star linebacker recruit out of Marysville. Didn't really do anything because they had him shadowing a Wisconsin tight end commit, so he was just dropping into coverage. And then I go see CJ Hicks, who was just everywhere tearing people apart, and that's I think that's what you get when you watch Reed Carrico. When you go see him, he's the middle linebacker and he has to do all of the tackling, and he shows up. And so that's another guy that seems to be, I don't know, Pete Werner, Tuff Borland, a combination of the two. If I don't like to do comps personally, but just a guy who's going to make a bunch of tackles, and your typical Ohio State inside linebacker, but somebody to watch. But again, they're going to be pretty deep, even losing 4 seniors at linebacker.
If we're doing the senior class, most likely to whatever, I think he is the most likely to murder some dude on kickoff coverage next year. Like that's where he probably, and that's, all of the linebackers on the team, all of the linebackers you have seen playing linebacker at Ohio State all started by being the guy who paves someone on kickoff coverage 2 years earlier than that. And that's where Gabe Powers probably fits in next year. I mean, it's, if they're looking at him as a Mike backer, like that's a lot of responsibility to throw on a freshman. That's, again, speaking of people we don't comp people to, the list of starting true freshman Mike linebackers is basically Andy Katzenmoyer. And Tuff Borland did it a little bit. I think that was a redshirt freshman year.
Freshman,
yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, true freshman year. It's Andy Katzenmoyer, and that's about it. So we don't comp people to Andy Katzenmoyer. So yeah, I don't expect him to be someone in the super mix for a ton of defensive playing time next year, because again, that's a pretty deep linebacker room. But if he's on the field on special teams and then just starting to work his way into that rotation by the end of his first year, start of his second year, that's that's all you need to do. That means you're on track to do pretty big things.
Yep. Anything else that you wanted to touch on before we get out of here?
No, I think we have successfully covered the class, and we will have a ton of coverage at BuckeyesScoop.com this week of all of this stuff. I cannot tell you the delight that Tony and I had either before or after we recorded something. It was like late last week, and it was like, oh man, early signings day is coming up. Which previously, when we were basically the staff at our previous stop at the Ozone, that meant Tony and I had to write up like 21 player capsules and articles on each of these guys. It's like, oh, we work with recruiting experts now. This is perfect. Great. That's not our problem anymore. So what a delight it will be to read Bill Green and Mark Givler and Alex Gleitman and Mick Walker's thoughts on all of these guys, and just be able to kick our feet up and enjoy soaking in that knowledge without having to produce it ourselves. I can't wait.
Although I do think we've been doing these joint pieces where you write half, I write half, and you start at the top, I start at the bottom, and we meet in the middle. Mm-hmm. Maybe we do something along the lines of what you said, like most likely to murder somebody on kickoff, and we just come up with a bunch of yearbook things and then make our picks, and no more than 1 or 2 sentences per person, of course, because that's not even our job.
Senior class superlatives. That's the word I was looking for earlier. And I will get a head start on that on Tuesday's morning scoop. I'm having Alex Gleitman on to talk about the class. And one of the things I'm going to be asking him is, so who's most likely to play early? Who's most likely to be an All-American by the time he finishes? Who's most likely to murder a dude on kickoff, whatever. So by the time we write that, I will be able to crib my notes from Alex, who is much smarter on all this stuff than I am, which is really, truly the secret to living your best life.
Yeah, whereas me, I surround myself with idiots. Anyway, thanks, Tom.
Who are you talking about, Chief?
All right, that's it. I'm out. I'm done now. Once the Chief gets thrown in, there's it's time to go. So thank you all for listening. We hope you appreciated this show. Little Michigan, little recruiting, all fun. And so thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Make sure to check out BuckeyesScoop.com. Become a member if you haven't, although by the numbers, most of you already have. So thank you for that. And if you haven't, you should. There is a ton of stuff there every single day. So thank you. Have a good day, and we will talk to you guys later.